Okay. All right. Who here used power or water today? All right. It's interesting. Not everybody did. Who used their iPhone or their smartphone today? Everybody used that. Got it, right? So for all of our installations, our military installations, our campuses, or areas that have all these functions, they use power and water every day. Yet cybersecurity, as you know, has not been a big focus in that area, as many of these systems have been built decades ago. So what type of operating systems do you think we find out here? Just name a couple. Windows XP, Windows 7 for sure. Maybe if we did something in the last 2 years, we have Windows 10 on it, right? So all these systems are out there, and we've enabled innovation and entrepreneurship or smart businesses to come out and have different systems for every one of these, right? Who thinks it'd be a good idea if all of these were on one type of system and network? Right? So not many. But we have connected a lot of these. We've tried to get more data from them. Another thing I think is interesting is all of our missions require power and water, and this should be a priority for the power company to make sure that we can still defend the homeland. Everybody think that'd be pretty important? Well, who thinks that when there's one power company that provides power to this Vegas Strip, and they also provide power to the nearest military base? So who thinks that the priority for power restoration goes to the military base first? No, wrong. No, if it's the Vegas Strip, right? So, but is that the best way to operate? Should we be allocating power and restoration to different functions depending upon, what we need? Who here works in a building? Maybe, less recently, but there are a lot of different functions in buildings. And I have an example here of a place not far from the Pentagon, a place I affectionately call the five-sided funhouse, that was recently built and occupied, well, recently, that's 15 years from now, ago, in 2010. 2 million square feet, 6,000 people. So these type of systems are throughout that building. Now, if you go down to the basement and you want to talk to security folks, the people who are taking care of the badges, the cameras, and all things regarding security, they monitor about 10,000 devices in that building. So then you leave there, and then you go to the Network Operations Center where the IT people manage all their systems and networks, the computers, the comms closets and things. They monitor about 20,000 devices. Now you leave there and you go to the Building Operations Center, the BOC, or the Facility Operations Center, or the FOC, whichever your preference, okay? They monitor 50,000 devices. Who here knew that there are more OT devices typically in all modern buildings than IT? A good many of you. However, this system is not getting regular updates and was built based on Windows 7. One of the things I wanted to ask your kind of opinion on when you think about where OT should be managed and best monitored from a cyber perspective. We commonly use and refer to the Purdue model, right? A lot of these at the enterprise level, everybody's familiar with when you're doing information technology, and then you've got the sensors and the processes here at level 0. There are environments to where you can communicate all the way up and down the stack. And that will require a number of different security protocols, security processes, and solutions potentially. It's really rare, and I've yet to see one solution being able to do all of this effectively from a cyber and OT and IT perspective. One of the interesting things, when you take a look at this is who is responsible for each of those. When we talk about AI in this environment, AI is a great tool that can do all this monitoring of each of those systems at each of those networks, can recognize and baseline all those different processes. But what's different and unique potentially in an OT environment? So for example, if you have environmental controls, you may need to wait a whole year to do baseline. That is typically not what is common in your IT baseline. And who here's heard of Zero Trust? All right. Well, Zero Trust has taken us from thinking about the perimeter security to thinking that an adversary is already in your network. So that's a whole different way of thinking, especially for the engineers and the OT owners and operators. They never think an adversary is in that network, and they certainly haven't built anything to prevent that from going sideways, typically. But one of the great news stories is I recently came out of an intelligence community conference, and there is clear evidence that when you apply Zero Trust, that you make it hard for an adversary to get through different locations to pivot within networks, that they get very frustrated and they cannot be successful. So there are a number of things that we can do in Zero Trust. However, we can't do all the IT functions for Zero Trust in OT. And in fact, we've been partnering with industry to figure out what those specific activities are. There's about 152 activities for Zero Trust for IT. We've got it down to about 104 activities for Zero Trust, for OT. So I was trying to make the point that in a very complex, multi-tiered level environment or network structure, if you deploy an AI tool, it's going to work pretty hard. It's going to have a lot of things it has to monitor, and you're going to have to spend some time really programming in some of those specific nuances. Perhaps not so much in a very simple OT environment. Some of these environments are very flat, and the data themselves is pretty simple, right? How complex is the amount of data that comes from a thermostat? Not very complex. It's pretty regular. So monitoring that versus monitoring people accessing the internet via a laptop, we contend that that's two very different functions that we would require out of our AI tool. So for example, we had a network that had a bunch of, three water and 2 wastewater systems. And this is a representation of that network. Very simple. And then when we asked an AI solution provider to come in and provide their solution, they said absolutely. So we come in, we typically, whatever we sell the box for, let's say is $250,000 for the box, and then we charge an annual fee of $250,000. That's typically the IT licensing model. Has anybody heard or seen that? Yeah, it's pretty routine. But that is not going to work for an IT environment. An OT environment, sorry. So this environment only had 100 points. So at $250,000, that's $2,500 per point. And who thinks the people who are running this environment have that kind of money? They don't. And I've yet to come across folks who work in IT that say, oh, Daryl, that's a real sad story you got there. We got plenty of extra money here, so why don't you take some of my IT budget to go pay for your OT? That hasn't happened, right? So I think we have to think a little differently about how we price these models out, especially when you think about that building when they have 50,000 devices and monitoring those with some potentially non-changing data or very rarely changing data versus the network operating model. All right. So as we think about who should be responsible for cyber securing these OT networks, I like to ask the audience who they think the right cadre of folks are. So, do you think it should be IT professionals who've got years of doing cybersecurity on the IT networks? All kinds of credentials, all kinds of courses. Who thinks, raise your hand if you think we should be employing IT cyber people to oversee the cybersecurity of the OT networks? All right, normally we have a couple people, okay? So who thinks we should be training the OT people how to do cyber so that they are cyber securing the OT networks? Okay, yeah, look, we got some hands there now. All right. So, but that's not everybody. So I've come to realize that I think a lot of folks think that we should have some brand new type of person, some kind of entity do this. And I can only think of kind of like these cyber unicorns, right? We have to get engineers, OT people to understand a certain amount of cyber, and then we have to get the cyber people to understand the right amount of OT. Because we have had time and time again where we've bricked OT because we've applied IT cyber. There have been incidents where they've handed all the cyber functions over to the IT department and in a hospital, and they have reset MRI machines when people were in the machine, right? So we have to just think a little bit differently there, and I'm suggesting we should also be thinking a little differently when we apply AI. So, would you agree that this pricing model needs to be a little different? Should we be paying the same for a tool that really has to work a little bit less, right? How many people are here have built their own computer at home? Oh, look at that. Okay. Did you buy the least amount of memory? Did you buy the least capable video and processing? No, you souped it all up. But would you need all that if you're playing an old, 16-bit game? No, right? So why should we apply that same kind of thinking to these different networks? And we got to figure out who's going to pay for this, right? So if the Chief Information Security Officer now has budget to do cyber for OT, that's amazing, that's great. But what we have found is there's an expectation that the OT people need to come up with their own budget for this. And they're challenged to even do the regular maintenance. What we have found in the department, a little success by convincing the cyber people to finally pony up for some of this, because it is not coming from the infrastructure people. So, kind of winding in conclusion of what we need from a balance, right? What are the unique requirements of OT? Who are the skilled people who are going to be getting the information? What changes do we need to make, from a process, technology, training, and requirements? Where are we getting these people? Are they coming to DEF CON? I certainly hope so. But it's not just the systems themselves. Contracts, we got to fix that, right? So in the future, I think there are a number of examples that show us that we didn't really get this right. So, who's heard of Battlestar Galactica? All right. Yeah, I thought we were going to have a reboot, not sure, right? Okay, so what were we concerned about? What did we changed everything we were doing because of the Cylons, right? And what was our solution? We went analog, right? All the things they're doing is going analog. So is that our solution as we look at all the issues that are being presented and all the capabilities? Not sure. Who's a Star Wars fan? All right. So this scenario revealed that the engineer and was able to develop a back door all the way in that 1 in a million shot would be able to blow up the whole Death Star, right? So was there some people that had some oversight of what should make sure that that didn't happen, potentially? And then, you know, with this scenario, giving everything into just one company and running everything is not going to work either. We've recommended for Zero Trust that one company cannot, one solution cannot just do that. And then, who's Star Trek fans? All right, I'm a big Star Trek fan. You know, James Tiberius Kirk. The middle name for all my kids is Tiberius. It's amazing. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. But this is the Wrath of Khan. This is a different type of Khan, not the Khan you're in, but the Wrath of Khan. You know, there was this moment to where he wanted to take over the ship Kirk was on, and Kirk remembered that there was a code that the engineers used, and Spock remembered that there was a code that if they entered this code in, they could remotely turn the shields off of the other ship. Does anybody remember that code? You're close, but now remember, this is in the way future, right? 1630. All right, so we got to make sure our contract language makes sure that if we have a way to take over something, it's got to be a little bit more complex than that, right? I mean, there wasn't any biometrics or anything like that. But I think the point here is thinking in terms of what we design in, what's in the contract, what's the requirement, and performance specifications. So we've established this new Cyber Resiliency Office of Control Systems in the Department of the Air Force. This is modeled a little bit of the Cyber Resiliency Office of Weapon Systems, so CROWS, and now we have CROCs. So we are a band of myself and 4 contractors right now, and we are on the mission to try and resolve all of our OT across our 200 plus bases. Want to have more information or help us do that, please contact us. And I've had a number of people say, well, where'd you come up with your logo? So we had a number of things, you know, of course, we let AI try and come up with what our logo should be, right? So the savage beast of the crocodile. Then there was another version, a very popular option. However, you know, the lawyers said right away, no way, right? And then we ended up with our cool little Crocs Croc. All right, so I really appreciate your flexibility and all of you staying here this long. And again, for DARPA and the AIXCC, the opportunity to share with you about how we should be careful about how we pay for AI in OT environments. Thank you.